Well, the chap you should really be talking to is a chap called Porky Pepperell, who died sadly a couple of years ago. Great man who single-handed saved Bude from being washed away for years and years because of the breakwater. See, just after the war, things were short and the council didn't have very many workmen at all, and Porky was their main workman. And he'd spend hours out on the breakwater, and those great huge stones that it's built of, as soon as they started to get loose, Porky would hammer down slates in between them to jam them up tight. And they wouldn't listen to him when they were going to, when suddenly people got rich about 20, 30 years ago, and they were going to upgrade the breakwater and do it all in, cement all the gaps between the stones. And he told them they were wrong, and he's been proved right. The waves now slide right up over this smoothed front of the breakwater, so even at lower tides now it's dangerous to walk across. And of course just inside the beach, just inside the breakwaters, gets full of stones which roll up so much more easily now, because the waves can't waste a lot of their energy going through the more or less open work of the stones. However, Porky was the last crewman of the series, famous old Bude ship, who when she was going, she was sank in 1937, I think. And at the time she was the oldest registered working vessel at Lloyd's. And 100 and something years old, still working, still supplying Bude with goods from Bristol and Swansea. Porky was crewman on there when old Captain Pethick owned her. And they did some tremendous voyages, and up and down to Swansea, right across the bay, right across the channel, the mouth of the channel there, and Bristol, bringing stuff home from Bude. But one day when they were entering Bude, and Bude's a terrible place to enter, even at a fairly gentle tide, you get a ground sea, and it'll pick up any ship and wash her straight across on the beach and wreck. That's where most of the boats are wrecked in Bude. You've got to come in, get around the barrel, which is the barrel rock at the end of the breakwater, get right behind the breakwater, then you can chug up into the locks and be locked into the canal, sail up the canal then to the warehouses. Well, they were coming in one time, and they were just leaving Bude actually, and a three-sheave block from a tackle up above fell down and caught poor old Captain Pethick right across his head and knocked him clean out, split his head wide open. So they tied it together with bits of rag and stuff they had on the boat, put him in his cabin, and carried on up. They thought we'd better go into Bideford and get him to a doctor pretty quick. But he came to before they reached Bideford and insisted that they beached her somewhere, and I don't know where, somewhere up in North Devon. And they beached the boat, and he climbed ashore, and he walked a couple of miles then to a vet that he knew, or a horse doctor chap, who tied his head together a bit more tightly so that the bones was made, and sewed him up, and sent him back to the ship. Well, they got to Bristol, loaded, unloaded, come back to Britain. Everything was all right, except that it altered Captain Pethick quite a bit, and he went, as I said, decidedly funny at times. And for instance, he had a habit of coming into Bude against the flag. Now they'd hoist this flag on Compass Point should the weather be too rough and the waves too sort of heavy, ground sea too much, that to bring a boat in, a wave could pick the boat and ram it into the locks to such an extent that the lock gates could smash and the whole canal system would drain, and there'd be catastrophe all the way around. They'd hoist the flag, and the ships were supposed to stand off then till the flag came down, and they waited for a good tide to get in. Captain Pethick, since he had his accident, would never wait for the flag to come down, and insisted on entering Bude against the flag. And it got serious. People used to crowd out there if the series was coming in to see what he'd do this time. And they'd come in and ram the lock gates at tremendous sport. And the whole lock gates would shake and rattle, and everybody terrified, running for the cliffs. So they got in the habit then of enticing him into his cabin as soon as they were approaching Bude, and it looked as though the flag could be up against entering. Porky and his mates used to entice Captain in his cabin and lock him in. and they'd bring the ship in when the conditions were all right, you see. And Captain would come out, threaten him with everything from hanging, flogging, everything he could, but nothing was ever done about it. I mean, it was sheer mutiny. But they got away with it, and saved the lock gates from the captain as well as Bude from being flooded. Well, where the town of Boscastle, see where the Cobweb Inn is now, that was originally a warehouse. It's built right into the rocks. That's where all the cobwebs are made. There's nice atmosphere in there. And it was originally a warehouse and a wines and spirits and beer warehouse. And the chap who looked after it was a very generous sort of fella. And if anyone had a really severe cold or not feeling very well at all, go in and he'd give them a pot of drink. And so as not to deplete one barrel too much, he'd take a little tiny drop from each barrel of all the barrels that are around, so there'd be all sorts of wines and spirits and beers and the whole lot in just one big pot. And if you drank that down, you were guaranteed to feel better, whether you was better or not. Anyway, old Mr. Boundy went down with his horse and trap, feeling absolutely dreadful with the flu. And it was a rough day, blowing and raining, and he went in to see his mate, and said he couldn't shake this flu at all. He'd had it for weeks, couldn't get rid of it. So warehouse man said, well, try this cure, and gave him this pot of mix of wine and beer and spirits and God knows what. Well, it went down he started feeling better, but it was only half gone. He was feeling a bit better already, you see. So they finished the pot off, and I think they might have had another little drop as well. And when he came out to getting his trap to go back up the village, he stepped onto the trap, and of course the pony moved off right away, and he lost his balance, fell flat on the floor, scat himself out on the floor, and lay absolutely dead to the world. Poor old Mrs. Williams, who lived just down the bottom there by the bridge, saw all this happen, saw him come out and fall out and lie still on the ground, rushed over and couldn't get any response from him at all, thought he was dead. So she ran up the village, that's right at the top of the hill, up the old hill, right up through the old Boscastle itself to the doctor's house at the top. And said, oh, come quick, doctor, Mr. Boundy's dead. He's fallen out his trap and he's lying dead down the plat just outside what's now the Cobweb. And the doctor, who was the first man in Boscastle to have a motor car, and it was one of these little upright models, got his car out and went down, and there was Mr. Boundy lying in the field still, scat out flat. Loaded him into the car, took him back up to the surgery, getting him out of the car, and Mr. Boundy came to slightly. Doctor was furious. Said, you're drunk. Get out of my surgery. Nothing more to do. You go and sober up and come back and see me when you're sober. Chucked him out. Well, he was in too bad a state, really, to go right down the village now and collect his pony, so he left it till the next day. And he went down the next morning. The pony, they'd taken him out of the trap. Of course, the pony was in the field, just biting the grass. And he went to catch his pony and put it in the trap and get home again. Mrs. Williams came screaming out of her. My God, I said, are you a ghost? Mr. Boundy said you was dead yesterday afternoon. And Said, I fetched the doctor for you and he took you away dead. Never to see you again. And he said, dead woman? He said, I just had a cold. He said, now I don't feel any better. Don't feel any better. I shall take the same cure again today. Well, Cyril Biddock, Arthur's father, again a musician, played the chapel organ, the brass band, the local choir, ran everything like that. And his great friend was the great lamented Charlie Jose, who farmed up Valency Valley. And they were great friends. Charlie had gone to pick Cyril up, and they were riding, or the pair of them riding a horse down one side of the valley, to get their two roads down into Boscastle, either side of this very deep valley. They were riding down, just going along, down to band practice, down in the hall, down by the bridge. And they heard across the valley there was another horse going down. And they knew it was a friend of theirs from the top of the valley that was coming down on his horse, who played a tuba, damn great tuba. And his horse seemed to be plodding along a bit slow, so Charlie, who was sitting on the back, said, give him a little blow, just to wake him up a bit, you see, on the way to practice. So he gave him a little fanfare on his cornet, which echoed across the valley. The old man guessed what it was, you see, so took his tuba around, swung his tuba around on his horse, and gave a great blast on the tuba. Of course, it frightened his horse to death, you see, and they heard the horse galloping, so it woke the horse up anyway. See, Charlie and Cyril got to the band practice, and they were all there. Grad people came in, got all their instruments out, and all waiting for Matey to come down with the tuba, you see, to join in. He didn't come. And so, we heard him coming down, so he'd give us a blow across the valley. We could hear him plain as anything. This frosty, clear night, sound carries beautifully. And they were hanging on and people get, let's start without him, just about to start without him, and the door opened. And in come poor old boy, covered in blood, head to toes, bleeding all over the place. And his tuba was flat to pancake. I mean, really flat. What had happened, his horse was nearly asleep, you see, plodding down the road, and the sudden blast from the tuba had frightened him. He chucked Matey off, who'd landed on top of his tuba, cut itself to ribbons, flattened his tuba, and the horse had gone. So they had to cancel the band practice, and they spent the rest of the evening chasing this. They found him 3 miles away in a field. So there's no practice that night. So, okay. Mm-hmm. Of course, during the war, the only people in the villages around were the young people, very young people, and the old people. And because of that, and because of the conditions of wartime, I suppose we might have been short of sweets, but we were rather spoiled, because the old people, I suppose, do spoil young people when, and there aren't the sort of middle-aged people in the way to get in the way. Then, bless their hearts, were away fighting the war. But the women were very well organised during the war, and all did some sort of war service, which, thank God, wasn't so necessary in rural areas, but all had to do Red Cross and first aid courses. And to do this, to practice this, it was run by the local doctors, and they teach the women how to deal with emergencies, broken legs and bullet wounds and all sorts of things, dreadful stuff. Well, it rather terrified me as a child, hating everything medical, being a bit frightened of anything medical, of broken bones and bleeding and anything like that. And quite often, on these exercises, they'd round the children up, give us all a little piece of card with some horrendous wound on it, and we'd have to scatter around, and the women would come around, find us sitting in a hedge or in a ditch or hiding behind some wall or other, read what was on our card, what dreadful injury we were suffering from, and bandage us up or take whatever emergency action they could, and take us back to the parish hall. Then the doctors would examine it and see if they'd done right. Well, I didn't mind so much like a broken leg, things like that, but I always tried to swap. If I had some terrible internal injury, I always tried to swap it because it used to worry me slightly. Anyway, there's one big exercise one time in Bude, and they used the golf links, which huge open area. It was all sandhills, really, really nice open area, right in the middle of Bude. And it was everyone that wasn't in the competition were given cards with dreadful injuries, and all sent around to high and lie about on the golf course. At the end of the exercise, everything was going well, and the women were very proud. They were doing tremendously well, and they realised one chap was lost. He hadn't turned up. And they got a bit worried because it was beginning to get slightly dark, and they getting a bit worried, and kid don't know what had happened. He might have hidden away, or got someplace he couldn't get out, got in a ditch and was stuck, or something. So they organised great searches, and it was a long time before they found out. Someone found a peg stuck in the ground on the golf course and picked it up, and on the front was written the injuries that this poor chap was supposed to have had, and on the back was written, "Bled to death, gone home to tea."